Welcome, welcome to Beyond the Huddle, the Central Arkansas FCA podcast where faith meets competition. I'm here with my co-host Josh Adair, and I'm Zach Rose, and we've got a great episode in store for you today.
That's bold talk.
We were
faith meets competition.
Josh to end the last episode
Not
where it says where
sports
sports meets competition. So, I mean, different.
I guess we're all about accountability these days.
You know, that's what it is.
Well, I'm
we
good
make
for
each
it.
other better.
Whatever.
That's what it is. So, this is where faith meets competition. We got a great conversation in store for you today. Very special guest from Sylvan Hills High School, Coach Dusty Clark. He's the head wrestling coach out at Sylvan Hills, and we're excited to hear a little bit about his story, a little bit about him, dive into the sport of wrestling, some of the things that Josh and I have seen. It's a unique sport, and it requires unique training and coaching to be able to perform at the highest level. So we're super excited for that.
Yep. So apologize to everybody for getting it wrong, but there was only one perfect person in the world, and his name was Jesus, and I'm not him. So safe to say that, excited to say that. I don't have to worry about that pressure. I mess up on the daily, and it's just part of life. And super excited for Dusty. Been able to partner with him through things with Fellowship of Christian Athletes and get the word out and minister to coaches and athletes in the wrestling arena and in life. And I appreciate his friendship, and we're just excited to see where we go and where the conversation goes. If you're driving down the road, hope you're buckled up. One, for your own safety. Two, there's no telling where this is going to land or where this is going to go. But it's gonna be a good ride. So
absolutely, let's dive right in here. Dusty, it's good to have you here with us. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about you, kind of who you are, your family, and how long you've been at Sylvan Hills?
So I was actually born here in North Little Rock. Then my parents, we had a normal life. My mom was a teacher. My dad, he was in the National Guard. He was a sergeant or master sergeant, and he deployed when I was younger. So, that kind of had like a huge impact on me as a child. And I always admired that structure. I was raised Assembly of God. We, went to small church growing up, and then grew up in a rural part of Arkansas. It's pretty awesome, looking back, knowing the things that you could do. I grew up close to Buffalo River, graduated with 50 people, it was awesome. Now looking back on it, it's a wonder I've turned out like I have. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect by any means, but, I went to school with doctors and lawyers and convicted felons. So, it's like, it's different, but it's also kind of cool to see how God's kind of worked out in my way, or, worked out in my favor in my career, because there's no reason I should be in the position I'm in today other than him. Because if you look at my background and you look at the people I grew up around and you look at the situations I was put in, it very easily could have gone a different direction. And I really feel like the majority of that is because, the prayers of, family members, my mom, my dad, my in-laws, people like that, just, seeking favor and things like that. But, for me and for my family to have the success we've had, it's only been through God's favor. It's not been through any actions of mine. It's been through doors opening, opportunities, being seized when they knock, those opportunities being placed in my, path that did not need to be there.
Yeah. So your journey to become high school wrestling coach and where you're at today, kind of just want to start from the beginning. What's your background with wrestling? How'd you kind of get involved? What was your hope out of high school that you would do or become?
It's kind of a funny thing. So my mom, she's the elementary teacher for 37 years. She hates coaches. She did not want me to be a coach. She could not stand coaches. And that was the last thing she wanted me to do. Now, my dad, he was,
I'll show you, Mom.
Well, yeah. Tell me about it. I'm straight up Merle Haggard. Her, Mama tried, but here we are. She's, she wanted me to be a doctor, or a lawyer, or something like that, and I probably could have done that, but Anyway, long story short.
Sometimes you get to wear those hats as coaches.
Yeah, you do. And,
Yeah.
That's the sad part about it. But, my dad, we had a really complicated relationship. It wasn't necessarily adversarial, but, with his jobs and everything, like, it wasn't that he wasn't in my life. It's just, he had a lot of PTSD from the military, and he had, things, and, his way of communicating with me was not very, is direct, and so, for me, it wasn't until I was deciding what I wanted to do, and my dad came out to support me. I was like, man, my dad really loves me and cares about me. And we were turkey hunting before I was starting college. He's like, what do you want to do? I said, Dad, I really just want to coach. And he goes, okay, well, if you want to coach, you coach. I said, you're going to be all right. And later that summer, we were having a revival at our church, and there, of course, growing up assembly, there's, you speaking tongues, different things, but, go on. But one of the deacons at our church came by, and he said, I had a vision about you the other day. I said, saw you as a leader. Saw you as a leader of men. And I was like, I'm 17 years old. Like, okay, I'll take that, like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. And, and then college, you go through college, I tried out different colleges, I couldn't find the right fit for me, and finally graduated from UCA. And at that time, I'm graduating there in the economic downturn, like we're sitting here in a recession, there's, no jobs anywhere. And, people were leaving, losing their jobs, going into education. The market was very, very, condensed. And so I've got three options. So my biggest option, or my best option, for football, which I thought was odds all about, was down at McGee. They're going to pay me, $30,000. At that time, the state teacher salary minimum was like $28,000. So they're going to pay me $30,000 to be a junior high football coach. I want to coach football. McGee's a really good football town. It's like, what we going to do? I'm on my way back from McGee, and the offensive coordinator from Mansfield, now the head coach Bearville, he calls me. He goes, hey, I really, we knew each other previously. It's like, I really want you to come work for me, be my defensive line coach. I know what you're doing, and all that good stuff. And, it's on the cusp of Northwest Arkansas. And I go, okay. And he goes, you're going to have to coach other sports. I don't know what it's going to be, but you're going to have to coach other sports. I was like, okay. So we get up there, we're coach football, and, it's Bearville's, it's a unique town, and we're having football season, and the athletic director, who's a Hall of Fame coach, Doug Schill, he comes up to me and another young coach at the time. He goes, all right, I got 2 stipends. I don't care who does it. He goes, Clark, you're hired first, so you're going to get the pick. He goes, first stipend, senior high boys track. Other stipend, senior high boys wrestling. They're both $1,500. All right, which one you want? And I was kind of like, I'll do wrestling because, one, you're in North Arkansas in the spring. I don't like being cold, going outside, in the spring, So I was never going to be a baseball guy. You look at me now, you're like, man, that guy's well insulated. Why would he hate the cold? But, it's here we are. So I was blessed in that because I didn't know. I knew if I was going to put my name on it, I was going to do well, because I was going to learn. And, I'd had a history, like UFC, I idolized Randy Couture, and GSP and those guys, I love that. And so, I bought a book as Randy Couture's Wrestling for Fighting, which I still don't even comprehend half of it. And then, but, just, getting into his mindset. And that's when I realized mindset was a huge part of wrestling. You can be a physical, specimen, but if your mind's not right, you're never going to be successful. And then we had a guy in town, which he is a young guy now. Then he's probably 60 now. His name's Seth Record. He had some sons coming along, and he had some older sons or stepsons that had wrestled in Oklahoma, and he wanted to be involved. And so, we worked through some growing pains first 2 years. And that first year we had, you always set goals as coaches, and my goals sucked. Or my bad, we're horrible. But sorry, I forget. My bad. But anyway, long story short, my goals were not very good. My goal was
talk radio and all.
Yeah, like you're gonna put me on the buzz and get me off this. Probably. But anyway, so my goal was to send a kid to college. You know, I'm sitting there thinking, well, it's bearable. There's
That was a bad goal.
well, here's the thing. You know, we did one the first year, so what? You know, we got to reevaluate. So, you know, we had a athlete. His name was Peter Acuna, which he was all conference running back, and he ended up placing third at state, and he got a scholarship to CBC. And Peter's volunteer, you know, long story short, he's had a successful life. That pulled him out of, you know, the potential for, you know, he had some, you know, friends, relatives that were in the, you know, trade per se. And, you know, now he's in a position that, you know, he's works in the ministry at the church. He works out here in North Little Rock. You know, he's got a great life, and that opportunity opened for him. And at that point, I realized that there's more. You know, I'm 23 years old, 24 years old. I realized that, like, there's way more to this than just athletics. You know, there's this, you know, relationship aspect to it. There's this growth aspect to it. And a ton of those kids that I coached back then, they still talk to me this day. You know, they'll send me memes, just random texts, you know, things like that. But, you know, it's that relationship that I had. And I didn't realize how important that relationship was, because I thought that's just I just thought that was normal. I didn't realize there were coaches out there that didn't believe in building relationships. And one thing that is kind of like, you know, with that, you know, understanding that is like, well, they're watching me, they're seeing me, they need to understand my walk. All right. And I'm by far not perfect. I mean, y'all been around me a lot. You know, you never know what direction I'm going to go, but, you know, making sure they understand that there's more, that there's a relationship bigger than me and them, but there's a relationship with Christ, you know, and there's an option for that. You know, that's a very important thing.
You know, you jump in here while you rephrase. Billy Graham, his quote on coaches is what's been mainstay is not the right word.
It's a staple.
It's a staple for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and we say it over and over and over again that a coach will impact more people in a year than most people will in a lifetime, good or bad. And for those who don't build relationships, and most of the time it's not positive, it's very negative, and it's an influence to them that they will live out and take out on their kids when they grow up one day. When they're coaching their teams, I've seen that a lot. May not be the case always, but then there's coaches like you and Coach Perry that we had on the last podcast that take a vested interest in more off the field or off the mat than what's going on in a player's life. And they're with them a lot of hours of the day that most parents aren't. And they have the opportunity to lead them to Jesus, lead them away from Jesus, to bring positive influences in their life, to challenge them to grow further, faster, better than what they thought was possible. Like Blair talked about on the last podcast as well. And so it's all about the relationships.
You know, and that's one thing. You know, looking back at high school and what, you know, I was part of FCA, where our high school football coach, Matt Sullivan, which he's the principal at Mountain View now, he brought FCA to our campus, and also Coach Robin Taylor, which, you know, she was the softball coach there at the time. They did a really good job of just, you know, building, you know, us up as people, you know, and strengthening us in school, having those Bible studies, you know, at lunch. And, you know, I talked to Coach Sullivan on the way over today. You know, one of the things that was really cool is, like, FCA was always just a Bible study. He got us introduced to camp. He got us introduced to the dinners and things like that, you know, where we went and heard the speakers talk about things. And it was like, man, these, you know, hearing that time, you know, a 56-year-old man going through the same things I was going through is pretty eye-opening. And then one of the things that I always took was one of my favorite Bible verses, 1 John 4:4 is like, greater is he that is in me. A lot of people want to go back to, you know, Philippians, you know, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But greater is he who is in me than who is in the world. You think about that for a second. When you're, you know, struggling building those relationships, or struggling, you know, working with people or whatever, when you can go back and relate to that and just think that as long as I keep my faith in Jesus Christ, you know, great things will come from that, because he is greater than what is ever in the world.
Well, like you mentioned, we talked about it on our last show, and just a common theme of walking in your faith, even when things don't make sense or when things get difficult, is standing on truth, standing firm on the truth that we know, because we've been given a promise. Just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, there was a covenant from the very beginning. God has promised us, and we've seen it true in his character over and over again, that he's going to show up and he's going to provide exactly when we need it every single time. And it's so important that our athletes know that too. And it's so important that our coaches, even, I'd say it may be even more so important that our coaches know that, so they can teach the proper things to athletes.
That's right.
Because I know in my situation and many other athletes growing up, their situation, it's imperfect coaching or an imperfect church or imperfect whatever can lead to hurt that simmers and exists within you because someone else was imperfect. It never had anything to do with God. It simply had to do with the person who was there at that time and moment that messed up or screwed up or didn't approach it the right way, that led to something that hurt inside of us and that made us not want to feel that same thing again. I feel like that's just pain at its root, is experiencing the brokenness of this world because of another person, because of simply just the sin that's entered our world.
Brokenness is a huge part of our society today, and you can't ignore it. One thing that when you talk about like brokenness, is like, you don't realize how many children and how many of our athletes are broken, just like, and not necessarily out of their own regard, but like it's, someone has made a choice that has impacted their life. They've had a, stepdad or a mom or someone walk out or, do things that, has caused irreversible, mental or physical harm to them. And that's one thing that my wife does a great job of, is, when we got married, we were, obviously a lot younger and, had a lot more, free time, fewer kids, but we always blended the team into our family. And, they all, of course, even today, the girls, that we'll be at a tournament and they'll find like they want her to braid hair, they want to do these things. But if you don't blend your family into it, some of those kids may never see a normal relationship, and they may never see like two adults genuinely loving each other. And that's in the, having a great wife, and like, Blake is phenomenal, but having someone that like supports you in your passions, and behind every coach that's successful, he has a wife that is keeping it together at home. We have two sons. They're both different personalities, they're both different abilities, and they're the reason I have gray hair and less of it. But at the same time, she has to deal with them until midnight every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, Saturday night during wrestling season. And then on top of it, whenever we host, she has to, come in and make sure that everything's, going good. We got the hospitality set up. We got everything set up so that we're successful. And if you don't have that, relationship there, you're not going to be successful, because you can't do it on your own. You can't serve two masters. And, the biggest thing for me, as a coach, every coach goes through their seasons. I spent the first, 11 years of my career as a football coach and a wrestling coach. And I felt like football was king. I knew football paid the bills. Nobody ever looks at a coach's contract and they look at their secondary sport. That nobody, they look at what's football being paid, what's basketball being paid, some places, baseball, track, things like that. But, bowling, wrestling, so, soccer, we're, down here in the back, we're the secondary sport. But at the same time, it's whatever you're passionate about, you're going to be successful with. And don't get me wrong, I love football. I love being part of it. But there came a season in our life where I knew that for my family to succeed, something had to give. Either I had to give up coaching completely, or I had to give up football, or I had to give up wrestling, or I'd had to get out of education. But for us to maintain that family, we had to make some choices. And it's really hard to walk away, on faith from, something is certain. And and luckily for me, the opportunity, at the time was presented to myself without a choice. I had a situation where there was a disagreement on how we should proceed forward, and so I made the decision that I'm going to focus on wrestling. And within 3 years, wrestling was being successful, and it was because I could devote my time to something I was passionate about, and I could spend more time with those kids, and I could take them to camps. I could make sure that they were doing these things, but also at the same time, at 4:30, I could be home and I could be helping Lake with, Hatcher's things, or I could be helping taking him. Hatcher's, by the way, Hatcher is my youngest son. He's autistic. He's sensory seeking. He has, he's had a really fun life, and he's one of the main reasons why my faith is so strong. But he has a lot of therapies he has to do for different things, OT, speech, things like that. But he's an awesome kid, and being able to do those things and step in and be that role of father is just it changed my life, at that point. Because at that point, all I'd ever known was all right, May's here, spring football, summer's here, summer football, September's here, football, November's here, football, December's here is wrestling, March, all right, April's Easter, May, that was our life. And, breaking that chain it was freeing, and I'm like, I know that, a lot of people, football, like I said, football is a great sport, but most of the people out there, they love watching football and they love watching the plays, but they don't understand what the guys like Coach Perry and people like that are putting in the entire year round just to be successful. And it's a lot, especially when you're trying to be a great husband and a great father.
Definitely. Want to continue to kind of build on that idea of relationships, but want to ask you a little bit as well about, you've kind of talked about your journey from football to wrestling, two very physical sports, physically demanding. You gave us the opportunity to come out and set up a booth at the Seven Hills Wrestling Classic. Is that what it's called?
The Central Arkansas Classic.
Yeah. And that was a great opportunity for us. I got a couple stories I can share later if they need to be shared, about just some impact we were able to have because of that opportunity. So thank you for that. But as Josh and I were sitting there watching some of these wrestling matches, I haven't been around the sport of wrestling too much, but seeing some of these athletes get down there and scrap and get after it, and also having conversations with them on the other side of, they were very intentional about making eye contact, and they were very present in the conversations that we had with a lot of the athletes.
It's highly intimidating talking to a wrestler face-to-face, wrestling athlete, because we talk to every other sport in the world. A lot of times people see FCA as a football ministry. Well, yes, but no, not solely a football ministry. And all these people are like, well, why are we interviewing a wrestling coach? Well, because every coach makes an impact. And especially with people that are used to, there is no personal space in wrestling.
None.
And their eye contact is very intimidating because they will stare a hole through you and not lose eye contact and engage and are genuine in their conversation and care about who they're talking to. I talk to other athletes in their sports, basketball, baseball, football, and they stare at the ground. They don't ever look at a coach in the eye. Wrestling is totally different. Mm-hmm. Why is it like that?
Wrestling is one of the last places you can't hide. I feel like wrestling and track are two places you can't hide weakness. You're going to know who the fastest man or woman is. You're going to know who the best wrestler is. And at the same time, there's a level of respect that goes into it, because those kids and those coaches, we're all in this boat together, because there's most wrestlers, they're not wrestling because they want to, it's because they have to. And when I say they have something in their life that they need to get out in a manner that they cannot express in other forms. They can't express verbally. They can't express in written forms. And the other beautiful thing about it is there's a weight class for everyone. There's something for the 106-pound kid who's struggling, with, self-image. There's a class for the 170-pound, running back that wants to do a second sport. There's a class for everyone. And there's a lot of acceptance in there because with the thing about wrestling, when you go to these wrestling matches, I'm sure it's kind of wild. You see them, they'll go for 6 minutes and they're just beating the fire out of each other. And they get up, they hug each other, they go on, raise hand, but the respect is so insane. But when you get out and you talk to other coaches, and it doesn't matter if you talk to Coach Evans at Searcy or, Coach Turner, he used to be at Cabot, every one of our kids has some strain that has drawn them to wrestling. Now there's some that, that wrestling was like, it's a family thing, but in Arkansas it's relatively new.
Yep.
But I'll give you an example of this is, we were looking back at some, at a banquet after our first year, we were state runner up, and we took, as girls, the 14 girls we took to, to state tournament, we medaled 12, which was, phenomenal. We had one state champion, and we went down the list, my assistant coach and I. 1 out of 14 lived in the same house as their mother and father. Now you think about that for a second. 1 out of 14. There's divorce, abandonment, live with grandma, live with aunts and uncles, been in and out of foster care. Now you tell me, why am I here? All right, I have both my parents my whole life. Maybe I need to teach them maybe I need to teach these people how to be a decent human being, so that when they have kids, they don't, they understand there's a way to go about loving and nurturing a child, and that's one thing that, just it keeps me in it, because I know that even though, they know that there's another way, they need to know that there's someone they can fall back on. And I'll give you an example. Is like this last spring, one of our first wrestlers we had when it was at Sylvan Hills, she ended up signing with a Division II school in Illinois. She signs, she goes up there, she enrolls, and that fall her mom has a stroke and dies. Wow. Dad's out of the picture, and she's come down for the funeral. She's on the way back, and she calls me, and I'm like, it's like 8:30 at night. And I'm like, why is she calling me? What's going on? Flip open the phone, or didn't flip open, slide open the phone.
Flip phone.
Yeah. Anyway, I slide open the phone, and I was like, hey, Yvonne, what's up? She goes, I have a flat on Interstate 55. How do I change a tire? Now, she's a sophomore in college, and she's calling me. Now, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but that's the kind of relationship that even after she's graduated, she calls, and she's someone that can ask her, do these things. And when you think about it, we've got about 65 kids in our room, which, it's pretty awesome. Those kids show up for a reason. And it's for that acceptance, it's for that nurturing, it's for that love and everything else. And like, no, what we do is difficult. What we do is hard. Like when you're trying to maintain weight, get in a weight class that fits, we've got, we're in the middle of summer right now. We've got, on our girls' side, we've got 10 really good girls in 7 weight classes. So people's going to have to make some choices about where to go. But at the same time, they know that what they're working for is for a greater good and for a greater purpose. And that's the first time a lot of them's had that family atmosphere. And so like, you're talking about, meeting these kids at a tournament, that may be the first time that someone's ever talked to them about Jesus, because they may have been from a split home where they didn't care about going to church.
Yeah.
To emphasize what you're saying, and that's a crazy pull from just the dynamic and demographic of the wrestlers that you have. And it's important. Josh and I were just talking about this the other day. It's important to know the culture that you're in and the community that you're around, because that's how we know how to best serve and to best communicate and to best love on. I think sometimes it's empowering those students to step into the fullness of who the Lord has called them to be as well. It can be isolating. We talked about on our last podcast, just the mental aspect of the game. Like you just said, there's no hiding your weakness on the wrestling mat. And it's really, really important that those athletes in any sport, especially the ones that are more isolating, that they know that they're encouraged, that they're loved, and that they're cared for. I had the opportunity at the Central Arkansas Classic to talk to a student who I just had some very vulnerable and open conversations with some of those students who just walked up. They're like bouncing around, getting ready for their next match. And they just come by and they stop and they start talking. And I'm like, they're the ones directing the conversation. I was just sitting there listening. But one of the students, he came up to me, was asking a little bit about FCA. And so I start asking him some questions about himself. He's a wrestler down in Benton, and start asking him kind of why he got started in wrestling. He said he had gotten concussions playing football and he wasn't able to play football anymore. And he's like, man, I just need an outlet to come and like still be an athlete and still compete with some of my friends. And he's like, I didn't really know anyone on the wrestling team, but he's like, man, I've just loved it so much this year. It's been such a good outlet for me. So I started asking him about his faith, and he tells me, he's like, he just like told me everything that he had done in his life that was wrong, like right there on the spot in the middle. It's like 11:30 on like a Friday morning or whatever it was at his wrestling tournament. He's sharing.
When you think about it, wrestlers can't hide anything.
Yeah.
They're singlet. I mean, you wear a singlet for crying out loud. It shows everything anyway. So, well, within reason. Well, maybe not, but
You're an open book.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing hidden. So you might as well just tell it as it is.
Yeah. And he's telling me these things. And he shared with me that he had given his life to Christ a couple years ago at a church camp. And so I asked him, well, how do you live that out on a daily basis? How do you continue to grow in your relationship with Jesus? And he goes, it's like, it's really hard because all those things that I struggled from, he's like, I'm trying to be better now. And I'm trying to do this and do that. And he was like, man, I just want to improve every day. And there wasn't like a general plan there. And so I started encouraging him. I'm like, well, your story, your testimony, it has power, and your teammates, they need to know about that. They need to know what the Lord has brought you through too. And so I share that with him. I was like, I don't usually do this, but here's my phone number. Like, if you need anything, reach out, like call me, text me, whatever. Didn't think anything of it. Didn't see him the rest of the tournament. I got a text that night from this athlete, and he texted me, and he said, to summarize, he was like, hey, our conversation earlier today, it really encouraged me to share the gospel with my coach and some of my teammates. He said when we got on the bus on our way back, he was like, I shared my testimony with my teammates and my coach. And he's like, we actually decided we're going to start a Bible study once a week with our team the rest of the season. And I connected him with our FCA rep down there in Benton. And he told me it was actually a cool thing too. This coach was a high school football teammate of this FCA rep, and it kind of just like,
well, the coach is Drew Harris, who's Washita is like one of the greatest football players ever go through Washita. But
you got it.
So it's kind of funny you bring this up, because Drew, he's a person who I greatly respect, and obviously he's a great guy. But, he came over from baseball, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, he goes, I don't know what I'm doing. I said, Drew, it doesn't matter if you know what you're doing. Care about the kids, and the rest will take care of itself. And, one thing about that Drew, he does a great job with those guys. Ben's got one girl, but what he does with a great job with those guys is teaching them how to be young men. Mm-hmm. And one of our kids that we had, he was picked up by foster care, and he ended up at Benton. And, I found out he was there, and, I called Drew. I was like, hey, man, you got this kid that, like, You get him, you nurture him, he's going to be awesome. And Drew's like, all right, well, where's he at? And I said, I don't know where he's going to be at your high school, but if I was checking, I'd go look down by where the bad kids are. And he goes and he finds him and, he gets him come out and wrestle, which he had wrestled for us for 3 years. And he'd been, he'd obviously, was pretty solid. He gets over there and the couple of the kids that, Drew had on the team, they got him locked in on being, responsible. And all of a sudden he didn't have to be an SIP, he didn't have all these things, but that's just the Lord working out. That's how the Lord works. It's like, he puts people in situations they need to be. And that kid, I'm not saying that he wouldn't have been successful with us, but he flourished over there because even though Benton didn't have a great sized team, Drew could take his time out of his day and make sure that kid was taken care of. And, he ended up, medaling at state and, had some colleges look at him. He wasn't going to get that. He could have got that with us, but he wouldn't have got it, at the level he did because he had that, that care. And like I said, it was frustrating to watch him go over there, but to see him flourish every, time we go out here. So they're like, man, that's just awesome because, once again, a guy like that, he puts people in those situations for a reason.
Absolutely. I think it speaks to there's only so much that we can do to actually like force things into action. It's more so just like how are we available for whatever the Lord's going to do on any given day. It's less of, man, how can I control this situation and maneuver this and move that? It's like, man, Lord, I submit to what you have for me today. However you want to lead, however you want to guide, I just want to be obedient, to be faithful in the moment that you present for me today.
And that's the thing as a coach, and especially, here you get opportunities to, witness through your actions that, most people, they're things that, you don't think the big deal about it, but it's life changing to those kids. And it's just taking them home and, you're riding home and your wife calls and you have a conversation with them. It's like, oh, that's how y'all talk? Yeah, that's how we talk. And it's like, oh, I've never heard someone talk to my mom like that. They've always, yelled. Because our boyfriend's always yelling at him. I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah. Oh, I get yelled at. But no, but you know what I'm saying. Like, it's
you like want to see something really cool.
That's the thing is like there are so many things as a family, and when you blend your family into it, that they don't see or that they see for the first time. Yeah. And that's like, one thing that's kind of funny is like, I love, I hug on my boys a lot. It's like they're like, I've never seen a dad, play with their kids so much. I was like, well, truth be told, I didn't see my dad play with us very much either, but it is what it is. But like, the role of a masculine male is so, different to them because most of them haven't ever had a positive father figure.
When you come to a wrestling match, if you've never been, you're listening and like, I've never gone. Well, you need to go. Everybody on earth needs to experience a wrestling tournament. It's like a beehive. You don't know what's going on. There's something going on all the time. You're looking at the floor like, who are these people in striped or whoever, and what's up with the armbands on their arms, and why are they raising hands and and numbers on the top of their hands, and what does that mean, and how they get there, and the scoring. If you like to go to games and you like to watch officials more than you like to watch the players on the field, you need to go to the wrestling mat. The referees are some of the most fun people to watch because they're genuine, they care, they're protecting, they're there for the safety. They have to contort their bodies sometimes more so than the wrestlers to see the call, to get their call right. If not, the passionate fans will let them know all about it.
And those guys are going for 8 and 9 hours at a time when the wrestlers are just wrestling every hour.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, we're blessed with a great crew of officials. I'm probably the only coach that ever going to compliment officials, but we've got
they're solid.
They're solid. And one thing about the wrestling officials that you don't see, football officials, you see a different official every other week. And you're in Central Arkansas junior high games, you'll may see the same crew once or twice. Wrestling, you see the officials. It may not be the same 4 or 5 at a tournament, but you'll see different ones. and you start building relationships with them. And that's one thing that I enjoy coaching wrestling is like when you have a disagreement with an official in a football game, there's your screaming, yelling, things like that. When it's fit wrestling, you go to the table, you talk about it. If they understand your perspective, they may change it. If not, you may go back angry. But at the same time, like it's a different relationship. And it goes back to what you was talking about a while ago. Is like those guys are in there for the same reason. They're there for the kids, and it's like I said, it's a strenuous sport. It's strenuous.
I mean, the camaraderie against opposing coaches, I've never seen any other sport be the same. Grew up playing basketball my entire life. Did the opposing coaches know each other? Absolutely. But were they buddy with them in the hospitality room? No, they're grabbing their food and they were going back, or they're going to their locker room to their safe provided space. There's no safe provided space in wrestling.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody changes in the stands or the restroom or wherever. There's no locker room for everybody to go to because there's no facilities to host everybody who's coming.
And that's what's awesome about it is like you have a group of guys and gals that coach wrestling that when you're in it for the right reasons, ego goes to the side.
Yeah.
And, I think about we have some great coaches in Central Arkansas. Aaron Butler, the coach of Little Rock Central, he just got National Women's Coach of the Year, which, wow. Congrats, Aaron. I mean, I'm really proud of him. He's a great resource. But, you walk up and you talk to him, he teaches Spanish. And like he pulls a lot of his kids from his AP Spanish class, but like the avenue. Oh,
where do you recruit your team from?
AP Spanish. Hear him coach. He will coach in Spanish from time to time. But like it's incredible. And then you got guys in Northwest Arkansas, like Nico West at Harbor, who he's got a huge martialese population, and then witnessing to those kids. And then there's kids and there's coaches across the state, that do a great job of just building relationships. Probably one of the ones that's one of my role models, is a guy that's over at Little Rock Southwest named Ray Sessions. Which Ray, he's been at Conway, he's been different McClellan, different places, and Ray's one of the best coaches all sports in the state. But he stays at Southwest because those kids need someone that they can turn to and respect, and that they can learn from. And that's what you get into is there's opportunities that open up because of success. And, I'm thankful every day that I'm here, because the options, that I was given, when I was getting out of, high school is like, all right, well, you're either going to college or you're joining the military. Well, obviously I didn't do that. But, it's like there's teaching these kids, just the foundation of just being a man or being a woman and like being responsible, is it's an empowering thing for me.
Definitely. So what do you think with just like the mutual respect between wrestlers, coaches, referees, like there wasn't any, from what I saw, like any kind of extra fighting or anything like that going on once they were done with their match. Why do you think that is? Because like it's so like I watch basketball athletes, we got to get it together sometimes because there's so much disrespect in the game of basketball. Did you just
include yourself in the athlete pool?
Oh yeah.
What are you trying to say, Dusty?
I'm saying me and you probably wouldn't score 10 in a game of horse, but whatever. Anyway, I'm
in a game of horse. I'm trying to piece through that.
I never played basketball, obviously.
Okay,
I'm 5'8", 5'9", depending on which come and go leave, and about 300 pounds. So
Perfect.
Clearly,
Perfect
I
to
was
sit down there on the block and get buckets. That's all
I was. If I was playing basketball, I'd been called the designated fouler. Just go in and lay the wood.
That's funny.
But no, it's funny because I think the reason that there's no animosity, and there's animosity, but the reason it's not outward in public is because there's the ego of a wrestler is different. Now you're going to have, when you get up in the ranks, your AJ Ferraris and people like that, but for every AJ Ferrari, you got David Taylor, which if you you want to, get vested, go out, look up some of David Taylor's stuff at Oklahoma State. He's huge on, having a strong, faith, strong walk. But I think part of that is just the people you surround yourself with. And, I look at, one of my, mentors in this, profession is a guy who used to be at Cabot, and now he's athletic director at Silent Springs, is Justin Turner. If you met Justin, you would never know that he wrestled at Oklahoma State. He was a teammate with Daniel Cormier. I mean, he's, on the coach by Pat and John Smith, on the cusp of greatness. But at the same time, he would talk to you and explain things to you. And, we wrestled Cabot this last year on text and said, well, we need to work on it. He says, and of course, in typical Turner fashion, he goes, a lot. I'm like, okay, thanks, Joe. But it's one of those things that you got, you got guys that they check their ego at the door, and that's hard to do. It's hard to do for some people. For me, until I started coaching, I was never on a winning team. I mean, we were horrible in athletics in high school. I mean, we had average basketball teams. We were average in baseball. Our football teams, we won a game or two every year, But, but one thing that I learned through all that is the focus on the little bitty things that need to be corrected, and it takes care of things. And I think one thing that a lot of coaches, especially in other sports, where they lose track of success is when you focus on the person, the sport takes care of itself, because they're playing the sport for a reason. But when you make sure that person's needs are met, that they're mentally stable, that they're physically, conditioned and everything else kind of comes in line. And, you get some people, they get so focused on winning that they miss the big picture. Mm-hmm. And, I think a lot of, I'm not going to necessarily say football coaches or basketball coaches or baseball coaches, there's so many skills that go into it. You think about football, unless you're a flexbone team or unless you're a, wing T team, you got to learn so many phases of passing, blocking, and everything else. But at the same time, you can't focus on just winning. You got to teach those skills redundantly. Right. And I think that's one thing with our wrestling community is there's such a redundancy of teaching skill and emphasizing, respect, that it just takes care of itself.
Yeah, definitely. We got about a little under 5 minutes left here. Want to ask you what you're looking forward to. What are some of your goals? What's something you're excited about for this next wrestling season as we step into this new school year?
I think the thing I'm excited about most is the unknown, because I was talking to Josh before he came in here. It's there's so many variables that we deal with as coaches. It's just fun to me to be able to sit there and look at my team that I know. I don't know what's out there, but I know how to prepare. I have a really dear friend of mine that he's a Green Beret, and we have some very in-depth conversations from time to time about, preparation. And, he's been in some situations that, were life or death. He's been in some situations that, were kill or be killed. And he said, we never worked, my right foot here is my left foot here. I react here is we work contingencies. If this happens, where do I progress? What's my progression? And that part of the season right there, this part of the season, that's what I'm liking, because I'm sitting here as I'm not going to say master manipulator, but I'm looking at my team. I'm looking at state brackets. I'm looking at everything. It's all right, what gives us the best chance to be successful? What gives this kid chance to be most successful? Where do they need to go? Then when I make that decision or make that, have that idea come across, how do I convince them that that's what's best for them? Mm-hmm. Because all athletes are superstitious. Yeah. All right. So if you're 100 pounds, if you're 107 pounds or whatever, you can go 105 or 110, whatever. I think you will be most successful at 120. Why? Well, you need to get in the weight room and find out, bud. I mean, just, it's just, but it's that part of coaching. That's where you build that relationship, because now you're investing in them. I had a conversation with a freshman on Tuesday that he's wanting to hang it up. I was like, because he's playing football, and he came out in spring and wrestled all June. He's like, I just want to focus on football. I said, I don't care if you play wrestle or whatever. I said, I'm worried about you becoming a better athlete. He goes, really? I go, yeah, I could care less if you're a good wrestler. I said, if you're not a better athlete and a better person because you're around me, I don't care. I've failed. Yeah. And he just kind of looked at me. He's like, really? I was like, I looked at him and said, buddy, I said, I did every sport, every activity in high school. The only thing I was all state at, quiz bowl. So just do what's best. So,
oh man, that's good. That's good. I'm super excited for this next school year. It's been so cool to sit down with coaches just like yourself who are making an impact here in Central Arkansas. Thank you for being on with us today and sharing stories, being vulnerable, being open. We really, really appreciate your transparency and just all you're doing at Sylvan Hills. So thank you so much for that. Josh, you got anything before we close?
No, I was just going to tell Dusty, thank you for the man of God that you are, that you don't just leave it on the shelf. You don't put it in a box or keep it in your shirt pocket, but it's on full display in everything that you wear and who you are and the words that you say. You are influencing the athletes underneath you, the people you see in the hallway, and the coaches that are around you that don't even want to be influenced by you. But that's what we do as believers of Jesus. We just sow seeds wherever we go and pray that the seed will take root and someone else will come back and follow up and water it, and God will take the harvest.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we got for you on this episode of Beyond the Huddle, the Central Arkansas FCA podcast where faith meets competition. We'll see you next episode. Thanks for joining us this week.